Hey everybody, in today's video we're going to be talking about the new Z-mount teleconverters. These are some of the best quality teleconverters I've ever seen in my life. And I think that actually the 2x is actually a viable choice now, whereas before I'd never thought that before. So I actually want to start this video by talking about the old teleconverters, the F-mount 1.4x teleconverter and the F-mount 2x teleconverter, just to give you a bit of background, to give you an idea about what I use these teleconverters for and where my opinions about the new teleconverters are coming from. So these F-mount teleconverters, the only one that I was ever really happy to use was the 1.4. I would happily use the 1.4x teleconverter on my 500mm 5.6, the 200 to 500 5.6, the 600mm prime. If I needed that extra bit of reach, I would happily use the 1.4x teleconverter. But I also knew that when I was using a teleconverter, obviously there'd be a change to my aperture, and there was also going to be a little bit of picture quality loss as well. It gave you just that little bit of extra reach, so I was kind of okay with that, but there still was a picture quality loss. However, when it came to the 2x teleconverter, that degraded sharpness and detail a bit too much for me. So I've never really used the 2x teleconverter. Once I saw kind of how it affects picture quality, I was never really happy with that. One of the reasons is I shoot high resolution cameras and I tend to crop in afterwards, and I would prefer to crop in and still have a sharper image, whereas with a 2x teleconverter, yes, I'd get closer, but I'd often lose a lot of that detail, that fine texture and sharpness, and that was just something that I wasn't willing to do. So that's why I've only really ever recommended the 1.4 and only ever really used the 1.4. I've just never been happy with the 2x teleconverter personally. There might be loads of you out there that have been happy with that 2x, especially when you just need that extra focal length. So hopefully that gives you an idea that I've used the 1.4 extensively, but I was never really happy with the 2x teleconverter. It just gives you an idea of my previous experience with teleconverters. So when it comes to these new Z-mount teleconverters, there's a couple of things I want to talk about first of all, and one of the biggest glaring features is probably their caps. And the fact that their caps come with this really big warning label on it. Nikon is actually quite concerned that people are going to mount these teleconverters the wrong way. And especially it being a mirrorless camera mount, if you put on a teleconverter the wrong way, the protruding area of glass is going to damage your sensor. So first of all, you get the big warning label on the cap to make sure you're not going to put it on the wrong way. And then second of all, the protruding area of glass of the teleconverter has like a rubber topper to it. So that if you were ever to try and put it in the wrong way, that rubber coating is going to stop you from damaging or scratching your sensor. So just one of those extra things that they've thought about. The second thing I want to talk about with these teleconverters are their build quality. So they are completely metal. Even the outside has this really nice matte metal finish to it. They also have a slightly different texture to the 70-200mm lens that you're going to use them on as well. Now, some of you, you're never going to notice that and you might be none the wiser, but to some of you that do notice these little details, these teleconverters have a matte finish, whereas the actual lens itself kind of has a shinier, not quite gloss, but just a little bit of a shinier finish to it. And they are cold to the touch. They do feel really well built and really well put together. I think they feel a lot more put together than the F-mount teleconverters were, especially. One of the biggest differences that you'll notice from these teleconverters is just how much glass there is at the back end of the teleconverter, especially compared to like the 2x teleconverter, which generally has a recessed back. It's just, you can see straight through the teleconverter. It just looks like there's a lot of really nicely thought out glass in there, and you can kind of just feel that they're going to be quality teleconverters. I do feel like they are going to be a lot sharper and a lot more useful. So the third thing I want to talk about with these teleconverters, to some people this is a little bit of an obvious one, but to some of you, you're not quite sure about this yet. But with these Z-mount teleconverters, there's only one lens currently that they work with, and that is the Z-mount 70-200 that I have behind me here. So the Z-mount 70-200 2.8 is the only lens that will take these teleconverters right now. Obviously in the future, newer Z-mount lenses will be able to use these teleconverters. But again, that's always generally going to be the zoom lenses. So you'd still be looking at, the lenses that are on the roadmap that are in the zoom length, focal length. That's where these teleconverters are going to be useful. So obviously, because those lenses haven't been released yet, we're in a situation where there's only one lens that can use these teleconverters. But I do think that it does mean that it shows right now, effectively you could turn your 70-200 into a 280mm with the 1.4 teleconverter, or you could turn it into a 400mm with the 2x teleconverter if you needed to. So it does offer a lot of flexibility with that 70-200, and then when those other longer lenses come out, you'll obviously get that longer focal length plus then the use of the teleconverters as well. So one of the things I wanted to do was talk about a lot of these different features of these teleconverters, but I thought it would be easier if I asked you guys what you wanted to know. So I asked the question on my YouTube account, what do you guys want to know about these teleconverters? And what I'll do is I'll read out some of those questions and I'll answer them straight away. So some of the best questions that I got: can we use the F-mount lenses with the FTZ with this teleconverter? And the answer to that is no. When it comes to the FTZ, you cannot attach these teleconverters between your Z mount body and the FTZ. That's not going to happen. You might think that you might be able to do that, but because these teleconverters have a protruding glass element, that actually protrudes into the FTZ, and you can't physically get them to attach to each other. So the 2x teleconverter will actually fit inside the FTZ, but you can't attach them together. And the 1.4x teleconverter, the actual protruding part of the lens, is bigger than the hole that's in the FTZ. So you just can't put them together at all. So no, unfortunately, you cannot use these teleconverters with f-mount lenses via the FTZ. Is the 2x teleconverter compatible with the 85mm 1.8? Nope, there's not going to be any of the current prime lenses. There's not going to be any of the 24-70s, the 50, the 85. They're not going to be compatible with the teleconverters. The easiest way to know if your lens is going to be compatible or not is if it has a recessed back. If the back element of the lens is completely flat, then it will not take a teleconverter. There has to be space in the back of the mount, in the back of the lens, for the teleconverter to sit in, like there is in the 70-200, but there isn't that space in any other lens to take the teleconverter, like on the 85 and the 50, so they'd have to have the space built into the back of the lens for them. Will they work with the Z50 and the 250 to kit lens, or the Z24-200? They will work with the Z50 with the 70-200, but they won't work with the 50-250 zoom lens, and they will not work with the 24-200. So they'll work with any Z body, Z6, Z7, Z5, Z50, but they will only work with one lens, which is the 70-200. Do they affect AF speed? I've not been able to test them properly yet. I do want to go out and shoot some birds in flight with them to see how they affect AF speed of the 70-200, but from just a couple of moving shots of birds flying past and moving from point A to point B, it doesn't really seem to affect speed all that much. I think the 2x does a little bit, but I've not checked that properly, so I want to do some proper tests on that, and I'll come back to you on AF speed and how they affect autofocus. And then probably the most important question, do they affect overall quality of the picture? The fact that you have an extra piece of glass in front of the sensor. You see, that's an interesting question, because if you were to normally ask me, does a teleconverter affect picture quality? I would say, yeah, it does. Especially when you look at the existing F-mount teleconverters and other teleconverters, there's generally always that trade-off, that acceptable trade-off, that you have a longer focal length, but your picture quality isn't quite as good. Let's take a look at that, shall we? Let's take a look at what the effect is of the picture quality. So there's one thing I need to let you guys know, which is that these teleconverters that I have are currently sample versions. They're not full production units yet. So we are going to have a look at their picture quality, and we're going to have a look at how they affect the 70-200. But let's keep in mind that they are sample units and the final production unit might change. Right, so I just want to quickly take a look at this. On this right hand side, I have a Z7 with an F-mount 70-200 f2.8 FL, so the newest F-mount 70-200. It's obviously at 200mm, and I've also stopped it down to f4. I'm here at 3:1, and I am struggling to choose between the two. I'm at 3:1. Most of my normal tests we do at 2:1. Maybe a tiny bit sharper here, maybe a tiny bit of ghosting here, but I think at 3:1, this is not going to be a difference that you might see kind of in a daily workaround environment. The fact that this lens on the left here is just as sharp, if not, to some people it might be slightly better than. And I'm going to ask you guys as well. So I'm going to ask Instagram, I'm going to ask YouTube as well. I'll put it up in like a post on my YouTube channel, and I'll put it up in a stories on Instagram so we can see the results to see what you guys think as well. But between these two shots here right now, I feel like the one on the left just looks a tiny bit better. So here's the kicker. This shot on this left-hand side is the Z mount 70-200 2.8 with the 1.4 teleconverter applied. I have obviously made adjustments for focal length differences. So the shot on the right side here was shot a little bit closer to the subject, hence why they look about the same in terms of size of frame. But this shot on the left, Z mount 70-200 2.8 plus the 1.4 times teleconverter to give us 280mm at f4. I'm amazed that that teleconverter plus that lens can be as good as, if not slightly better, than just the f-mount 70-200 on its own. Teleconverters have always been renowned of, giving your lens a bit of a sacrifice, reducing sharpness for that extra focal length. We can see that's not the case. So I just want to say thanks everybody that voted, and thanks to everybody if you put an opinion about a particular image over the other. Obviously, comparing picture quality on Instagram and through YouTube kind of posts isn't always the best thing to do, and I knew that, but I thought it'd be a good way just to kind of see what your thoughts were. And actually the results were pretty surprising, especially on Instagram, where 73% of the votes went to the bottom choice, and that was in fact the Z mount 70-200 with the 1.4 teleconverter. And obviously if you voted on YouTube and you mentioned the left hand side one, the left hand side shot is the Z mount 70-200 with the 1.4 teleconverter. For the next test, we are doing the 70-200 2.8 with the 2 times teleconverter against the 180-400 f4. Okay, so here on the right hand side, we're at 400mm, we're at f5.6, and this is the f-mount 180-400 with the built-in 1.4 teleconverter. Obviously, I've not enabled that teleconverter at the moment, I've just set it to 400. And then on the left hand side, we have the 70-200 with the 2 times teleconverter. Obviously, that then makes that a 400 f5.6, and we're at 2-1, and I would say this is a little more clear than the 1.4 teleconverter comparison. We can see that the 70-200 with the 2 times converter is not quite as sharp as the 180-400, but that's the 180-400 is a considerably more expensive lens and is known to be one of the best zoom lenses you can actually buy. So considering that we're here at 2-1 and we're only seeing a little bit of sharpness drop off, I think the 70-200 2.8 with the 2 times teleconverter is actually quite a viable option. Whereas I mentioned before in this video, the previous f-mount 2 times teleconverter I just never used because I was never happy with the results. I think this, for a lot of people, could actually be justifiable as a worthwhile 400mm f5.6 focal length. These are some of the best quality teleconverters I've ever seen in my life. And I think that actually the 2 times is actually a viable choice now, whereas before I'd never thought that before. I hope that you found those couple of samples useful. What I do need from you though is, what lenses are you wanting to compare this setup against? So for me, the question that I have is, can I now carry a 70-200 plus a 2 times teleconverter instead of my 500mm PF, for example? I know that it's a 100mm short, so it's a 400-5.6 versus a 500-5.6, but could I do that if I wanted to shoot natively instead of using the teleconverter? Could I use the 70-200 with that 1.4 times teleconverter just to get me close to that almost 300mm f4? Could I use the 70-200 plus the 2 times teleconverter instead of my 180-400? They're the things that I'm thinking of, but I want to know what you guys are thinking of. What lenses are you thinking you might use instead of a 70-200 plus the teleconverters? Or what lenses are you thinking you could use that setup instead of? You're thinking that actually you might not need to wait for the 100-400 because you could use the 70-200 with the 2 times teleconverter and get just as good results or good enough results for what you're happy with in the meantime. So let me know what tests you want me to do so I can do my full-blown comparison tests with this lens, with the teleconverters, against those longer focal length lenses. Well, I hope you found this video useful, and I hope that it's given you some insight into the Z mount teleconverters. I am definitely excited about them. For once, I think I can actually use a 2x teleconverter. As I mentioned at the start of this video, I've just never been happy with that 2x teleconverter. So for me, I think it's going to make quite a big difference. So as always, thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, then please do comment below. Please do subscribe because you never know what's around the corner. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.